how Donald Trump has treated and talked about America's military and military service people, calling them suckers and losers,
Hamas,
has diminished the significance.
We're talking over each other. I apologize.
I would like that we would have a conversation that is grounded in full.
I hope you got to say what you wanted to say about Donald Trump. There are a lot of things
there are
a lot of things that people want to learn about you and your policies.
I'm tired of that.
If that's the case, why is half the country supporting him? Why is he beating you in a lot of swing states? Why, if he's as bad as you say, that half of this country is now supporting this person who could be the 47th president of the United States? Why is that happening?
You're tuned in to Kaz TV.
Invite everyone to go to kamalaharris.com, and you will see that I have 80 pages of policies that are quite comprehensive and should be accessible to anyone who would like to read them. And it includes what I intend to do about affordable housing, what I intend to do about small businesses, what I do
and that's why we invited you here, to see where you were in 2019 and where you are now.
America's military and ensure we have the most lethal and best fighting force in the world.
Madam Vice President,
and
they're giving me a hard rap
Well,
here.
I thank you for the time.
I thank you for the time.
It's good to meet you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There you have it, folks. Instead of telling millions of viewers her stance on her policies, she'd rather you just go to her website. What does that say about her willingness to defend her policies in real time? Let's dive into this interview, and if you've seen any of her interviews, you know she's going to avoid questions, and this is probably going to be her hardest interview yet. Fox News. So let's dive into it and expect to see a lot of word salad. I grew up in the middle class, and I've prosecuted transnational criminal organizations.
Thank you. It's good to be with you, Brett.
You know, voters tell pollsters all over the country and here in Pennsylvania that immigration is one of the key issues that they're looking at this election, and specifically the influx of illegal immigrants from more than 150 countries. How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
So the question is, how many illegal immigrants have come into the country over the course of your administration? That's the question. How many? Should be a number, should be the answer, or I don't know. Let's see what the response is.
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration, because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but do you, just a number. Do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Brett, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished. We have an
it's a rough estimate of 6 million people have been released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get to the question, I promise you.
I was beginning to answer.
And when you came into office, your administration immediately reversed a number of Trump border policies.
So before I go any further, before this interview came out, the interviewer said that he was only given 30 minutes. You're going to see a lot of him trying to get the questions out and her appearing to try to waste time.
Most significantly, the policy that required illegal immigrants to be detained through deportation, either in the U.S. or in Mexico. And you switched that policy. They were released from custody awaiting trial. So instead, included in those were a large number of single men, adult men, who went on to commit heinous crimes. So, looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
At the beginning of our administration, within practically hours of taking the oath, the first bill that we offered Congress, before we worked on infrastructure, before the Inflation Reduction Act, before the Chips and Science Act, before the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the... Yes, ma'am.
May I finish responding, please? But you have to let me finish,
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate.
So keep in mind what's going on here. They're on a time limit, And he asked, do you regret removing this policy that Trump had in place, where if people came in, they're sent back. They're not released into the American public. They're sent back. Do you regret that? Because some problems came with that, and he's about to get into that. Clock is ticking, and she says, okay, one of the first things we did before we did this, before we did this, before we did this, before we did this. She's taking a knee. She's running the ball. She's running the clock out. She's not trying to answer the questions.
Back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
At the beginning of our administration, within practically hours of taking the oath, the first bill that we offered Congress, before we worked on infrastructure, before the Inflation Reduction Act, before the CHIPS and Science Act, before the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm
And they
in the
didn't
middle
bring up
of
that bill.
responding to the point you're raising,
Okay.
and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
We recognized from day one that, to the point of this being your first question, it is a priority for us as a nation and for the American people. And our focus has been on fixing a problem. And from day one, then, we have done a number of things, including to address our asylum system and put more resources, getting more judges, what we needed to do to tighten up penalties and increase penalties for illegal crossings, what we needed to do to deal with points of entry between border entry points. That's the work we did, and we worked on supporting what was a bipartisan effort, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Congress, to actually strengthen the border. That border bill would have put 1,500 more border agents at the border, which is why I believe the Border Patrol agents supported the bill. It would have allowed us to stem the flow of fentanyl coming into the United States, which is a scourge affecting people of every background, every geographic location in our country, killing people. It would have allowed us to put more resources into prosecuting transnational criminal organizations, which I have done as the Attorney General, former Attorney General of a border state.
Madam Vice President, a couple of things.
Prosecuted trafficking of drugs, guns, and human beings. And Donald Trump, but let me just finish.
Six Democrats.
She rambles on about this Citizenship Act and everything they've tried to do, but she never answers or even revisits whether Trump's move was the right move or not. And there's a reason for that. Why avoid answering this question? I think it's pretty simple. Because deep down she knows the reversal of this policy came with a lot of negative consequences. Let's move on to another issue that's been trending. She seems to not think is very important to a lot of voters. Maybe she's right, maybe she's wrong. But I thought it was interesting. Let's see how she responds to this.
Breakthrough. This particular one from the Trump campaign has gotten a lot of attention.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
So are you...
Okay, now, let's be honest. They cut that video very short, but we can play the full thing. So let's play the full video, because we know they only had 30 minutes. They couldn't waste too much time getting into the long explanation.
When I was Attorney General, I learned that the California Department of Corrections, that they were standing in the way of surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. And there was a specific case. And when I learned about the case, I worked behind the scenes to not only make sure that that transgender woman got the services she was deserving. So it wasn't only about that case. I made sure that they changed the policy in the state of California so that every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access to the medical care that they desired and need.
So are you still in support of using taxpayer dollars to help prison inmates or detained illegal aliens to transition to another gender?
I will follow the law, and it's a law that Donald Trump actually followed. You're probably familiar with, now it's a public report, that under Donald Trump's administration, these surgeries were available on a medical necessity basis to people in the federal prison system. And I think, frankly, that ad from the Trump campaign is a little bit of like throwing stones when you're living in a glass house.
The Trump aides say that he never advocated for that prison policy and no gender transition surgeries
you know what? You got to take responsible for what happened in your administration.
Yeah, no surgeries happened in this presidency.
It's in black and white.
Would you still advocate for using taxpayer dollars for gender reassignment surgeries?
I will follow the law, just as I think Donald Trump would say he did.
You would have a say as president.
Like I said, I think he spent $20 million on those ads, trying to create a sense of fear in the voters because he actually has no plan in this election that is about focusing on the needs of the American people.
Well, it's ironic that her response to that is, you have to take responsibility for what happened in your administration, when he mentioned data points earlier about the illegal immigration situation, and she didn't want to address that. The question is, does she support taxpayer-funded transgender surgeries for prisoners? And her response is, I'll follow the law. He's not asking if you'll follow the law. Most voters are wondering, what law will you try to promote? What direction are you heading? What policies do you support? So then we know what law you will be following. And this is the part that bothers me about her lately the most. If she's for it, she should just say it. By dodging the question, she's deceiving voters. Here's why that's dangerous. When politicians refuse to answer questions on controversial topics head on, they rely on you forgetting or hope that it's just washed away as a conspiracy theory in your mind. Then they downplay it until that actual law or policy is pushed through. And by then, it's too late. It's the new law now, and you've got to follow it. Because what ends up happening is this. These things are, no one's ever going to do that. That's never going to be something that anyone's going to do. She hasn't said that that's going to happen. It's conspiracy theory. That's just one clip that you saw played on the internet. And then when it happens, those same people will come to you and say, well, this is just what the American people wanted. This is what we voted for. And it's like, no. You were telling everybody this wasn't going to happen.
Nothing comes to mind that you would do differently?
Let me be very clear. My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency. And like every new president that comes into office, I will bring my life experiences, my professional experiences, and fresh and new ideas. I represent a new generation of leadership. I, for example, am someone who has not spent the majority of my career in Washington, D.C. I invite ideas, whether it be from the Republicans who are supporting me, who were just on stage with me minutes ago, and the business sector, and others who can contribute to the decisions that I make about, for example, my plan for increasing the supply of housing in America and bringing down the cost of housing, addressing the issue of small businesses, which is about working with the private sector to bring more capital and access to capital to our small business leaders, including my plan for a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and for small businesses, extending the tax deduction from $5,000 to $50,000.
We've heard a lot about those plans in recent days. Your campaign slogan is a new way forward, and it's time to turn the page. You've been vice president for 3.5 years, so what are you turning the page from?
Well, first of all, turning the page from the last decade in which we have been burdened with the kind of rhetoric coming from Donald Trump that has been designed and implemented to divide our country and have Americans literally point fingers at each other. Rhetoric and an approach to leadership that suggests that the strength of a leader is based on who you beat down instead of what we all know. The strength of leadership is based on who you lift up. The strength of an American president, which is one who understands that the vast majority of us have more in common than what separates us.
Madam Vice President, more than 70% of people
that is
tell
about
pollsters,
turning the page on rhetoric that people are frankly exhausted of, Brett.
More than 70% of people tell the country is on the wrong track.
No,
Madam Vice President, you call Donald Trump.
The significance
you
of that.
call Donald Trump He's misguided. You say now
He's
he
unstable.
is unstable.
He is unstable, Brett.
He's not well. You say he's mentally not stable.
He's not stable.
Let me ask you this. You
and
told
we
many
should all be
interviewers
concerned
that Joe Biden was on his game, that ran around circles on his staff. When did you first notice that President Biden's mental faculties appeared diminished?
Joe Biden, I have watched from the Oval Office to the Situation Room, and he has the judgment and the experience to do exactly what he has done in making very important decisions on behalf of the American people.
There were no concerns raised?
Brett, Joe Biden is not on the ballot.
I understand.
And
but
Donald Trump
But
is,
you talked about it.
And Donald Trump
After George Clooney said within a few minutes of talking to President Biden at a fundraiser that he thought this was not the same Joe Biden that we saw on the debate stage.
Donald Trump is on the ballot.
I understand. You met with him at least once a week for 3.5 years. You didn't have any concerns?
I think the American people have a concern about Donald Trump, which is why the people who know him best, including leaders of our national security community, have all spoken out. Even people who worked for him in the Oval Office, worked with him in the Situation Room, and have said he is unfit and dangerous and should never be president of the United States again, including his former vice president, which is why the job was open for him to choose another running mate. So that is a fact. That is a fact.
Now, here's the strategy that I think the Harris campaign had going into this interview. I think they intentionally wanted her to drag out her responses. She only had 30 minutes to do this interview, and every time she's asked these questions, she stretches out the answers to the point of absurdity. This way, the clock runs out without having to address any real key issues that people watching this interview want to hear her answer. So what's the point of her doing this interview if she's not going to answer the questions? It allows her to say, hey, I did a Fox interview. I was asked hard, tough questions by a side that doesn't agree with me, without actually risking her campaign or giving any real clear answers.
Not to mention how Donald Trump has
all of this money
has treated and talked about America's military and military service people, calling them suckers and losers,
Hamas,
has diminished
and
the significance.
We're talking over each other. I apologize.
Well, I would like that we would have a conversation that is grounded in full assessment of the facts, which includes, I think this interview is supposed to be about the choices that your viewers should be presented about this election, and the contrast is important.
Yes, ma'am.
And on the subject of Iran, I am offering what should be an important contrast that is presented for folks to make a decision that they feel.
Who look at what the administration did and say and think differently. Madam Vice President, they're wrapping me very hard here. I hope you got to say what you wanted to say about Donald Trump. There are a lot of things.
There's more to say. I have much more to say.
There are a lot of things that people want to learn about you and your policies, and that's why we invited you here.
I invite everyone to go to kamalaharris.com, and you will see that I have 80 pages of policies that are quite comprehensive and should be accessible to anyone who would like to read them. And it includes what I intend to do about affordable housing, what I intend to do about small businesses, what I do
and that's why we invited you here
our economy,
to see where you were in 2019 and where you are now.
America's military and ensure we have the most lethal and best fighting force in the world.
Madam Vice President,
and
they're giving me a hard rap
Well,
here.
I thank you for the time.
I thank you for the time.
It's good to meet you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This, my friends, is another way to avoid scrutiny. Instead of defending her ideas in real time, where she might face some tough follow-up questions, she just redirects everybody to a website where there's no debate, no accountability, and no scrutiny. Just policies on a paper or a computer screen. And this is a smart strategy. Avoid answering, avoid defending, then claim victory by saying, I did a tough interview. All she did was waste the viewers' time that were actually looking for some policies and direct her to their website. So if you agree with this analysis, click the like button and hit the notification bell and subscribe. And if you disagree, comment below, because there can be something I missed. I want to know areas that I may be blind. But when I look at this with my own 2 eyes, my own 2 ears, I don't see a lot of substance here. And I hope that the American people, if they're seeing what I'm seeing, they can be honest with themselves and say, yeah, there's nothing here. So, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.